Big Macintosh stared at her empty bed. Applejack was missing. The covers had been neatly turned down. That would be Granny Smith's doing. She turned down the covers every evening, as if she was convinced one night a tiny orange filly would scramble through the window, fall asleep, and come down for breakfast like nothing happened. He wasn't stupid. It had taken twice as long for him to learn the multiplication in school, and he needed to sound out long words in books. He didn't really like reading at all unless he was alone and nobody could see his lips moving. But he wasn't stupid. Convincing the rest of the world there was a difference between a slow and stupid, however, was an ongoing struggle. Applejack had never treated him like he was stupid. She was so much younger. She listened and rapped, as it explained, working on the farm for her, and though he was the smartest pony in the world, she wasn't old enough to use the language that he couldn't understand when he read her note. He pictured it, full of tooth marks and split stains from being constantly pulled from under the china angel on the mantelpiece place where she had left it. They all knew it by heart. It didn't make coping any easier. Treading as delicately as he could, which wasn't very, but Granny was practically deaf, so it didn't matter. Big Macintosh crossed the room and nudged Applejack's pillow to fluff it, and it was his own private ritual. Granny turned down the covers, he fluffed the pillows, and they both set out in an extra place at meal times, and then refused to look at the unused plate. He was the stallion of the family now that Pa was gone, and he was supposed to look out for his little sister, but he had obviously done something wrong. If she had just up and left without saying a word, he wasn't given too much in an introspection. He couldn't spell it if told to write it down. But what bothered him? Why she had been so unhappy? Was she really dissatisfied with life at Sweet Apple Acres that she had to leave it? And then? He sighed and then went to the window. It was dawn, bright light cresting over the horizon like paint on a dark canvas. He had barely slept, and that wouldn't do. He had to work finish today. Granny couldn't imagine the buckling anymore. She tried, but it was mostly his job, since her arthritis really took hold. He had to get bigger and stronger so he could take care of things like the way the stallion of the family was supposed to do. He stayed at the window, thinking his private thoughts until the sky exploded. That was how it seemed. At least a wash of multicolored light detonated and shot outwards over the farm. Birds of the dawn chorus abandoned their song and the squawk and fly in all directions. Dozens of rabbits, squirrels, and other animals dashed about in the orchard. A crashing noise followed seconds after the rainbow explosion, as if the universe was stamping on its hooves. "What's that?" Granny burst through the door, blurry-eyed but alert. "Did the boiler explode again?" Big Macintosh tossed his head in a quivering sky. The ring of the colored light was traveling its way to the distance like a gigantic ripple in the fabric of reality. His mouth hung open, but he couldn't keep himself. He had never seen anything like that before. "What in tarnation?" Granny squinted at. "The heck is that?" Big Macintosh didn't know. A strange feeling pulsated in his belly. He wouldn't realize it until later. It was excitement. That rainbow ring was a portent or sign, or something else significant, for which he didn't have the words. He could feel it in his fetlocks. "Granny," he said slowly. "What is it, youngin'?" "Applejack." "Where?" She scanned the road. "Dang, Philly, wild as a June bug on a string. I don't see her." "Not yet," he smiled, even though he couldn't hear yet the clatter of the tiny orange hooves. "Soon. You think?" "Yup." He turned to the window. "Gotta wait for her at the gate." Granny watched him with narrowed eyes. "You'll be wasting good bucking time." "Yup." "You must be sure you're willing to get neglect bucking." "Yup." A smile creased over her wrinkled face. "Good enough for me." Big Macintosh stood at the crest of the hill and watched his sister and her friend darting between the trees. Midday sun dappled orange and blue coats as the two ponies played. No matter how old she acted or how much responsibility she tried to take, Applejack was still a filly at heart. It would be a couple more years before she could reasonably be called a mare, and he would have to start worrying about stallions courting her. In his humble opinion, she would act like a filly as much as he could for while she could, but the only time she let her guard down it seemed to be when that little blue Pegasus came calling. He was standing in plain view, but neither the fillies spot him. They were too absorbed in chasing each other in some complicated game of tag mixed with hide-and-seek and Rigby. The Pegasus arrowed up between the branches, and a swish of leaves was the only indication where she had gone. He watched Applejack canter into the view, spot the leaves, and pretended not to see them. She slowed to a trot, but when the Pegasus tried to surprise her from above the sky, she was ready. Somehow slewed her body to one side and turned her madcap over into a pinning on the other pony. "I win," she crowded. The Pegasus spat out a mouthful of leaves. Her rainbow mane and tail were studded with twigs and bits of bark. "No way! Yes way!" Another roll and their positions were reversed. A single leaf stuck up the Pegasus' flank. It looked a little like a cutie mark, but it flaked away to reveal the actual cutie mark beneath it. Yep, on their way to becoming mares, but still fillies all the way that counted. "No way!" Applejack blew a breath. "God darn it, you weigh a ton. No apple pies for you." "What?" The Pegasus was aghast. "No fair, I love apple pies." "I could tell, you're breaking my ribs." "Aw, man." The Pegasus beat her wings and lifted her weight off, only for Applejack to launch herself and reverse their positions once more. "I can't believe you fell for that." Applejack grinned. "I'll let you win." "Sure you did. Oh, there goes a flying pig." The Pegasus blinked. "Now that'd be awesome." Applejack made a face. "You'd ever think everything would be better changing wings?" "Well, it would." "Nuh-uh." "Uh-huh. Imagine raccoons and rabbits and squirrels with wings. They'd be so much cooler than they are now." "It'll be a gosh darn awful. They'd reach the apples before we could pick them." "Nuh-uh, because you have wings too, so you could chase them off. You wouldn't have to learn to buck anymore, either. You could just take the apples right off the branches." "I like bucking. Why would I want wings?" "Well, duh, because everything would be more awesome with wings." "I am awesome just the way I am." "Nuh-uh. I beat you today without wings, did I?" The Pegasus pouted. "Totally not awesome." Big Macintosh allowed a small smile to return up his mouth. "Yep, it sure did. Do Applejack good to act like a filly sometimes." He turned away and hid behind some bushes before she could see them, and demand a bucking lesson instead. There was a lot of satisfaction that had to be done in doing a simple job well. Apple bucking was the balance of strength and accuracy, but not academic. Neither was Big Macintosh. He had long ago reconciled himself to his shortcomings and no longer felt he had to justify himself with the world. Either ponies accepted him the way he was, or they didn't, and they weren't worth knowing anyhow. He had this definitely been a Valentine's Day to remember, or not. Usually bucking had helped him order his thoughts, but today it left him in such a tizzy, he was still reshelving a few things in his head. He kicked out one with hind leg, and a tumble of red deliciousness landed in each of the 3 baskets he had positioned. Taking the handle between his teeth, he dragged each of the carts and maneuvered them up the ramp. When he was about done and checked to make sure he hadn't missed any and rearranged himself in his harness to pull the entire load through the orchard checking, Granny would take out the bad ones and save what she could, turning the others into mash or compost, or for one of those elements that she used when she and Applejack pulled a muscle. He looked around him and he walked, wondering where the heck his sister was. She had been due to help him today, but in all the confusion which Shirley had forgotten, now was trying to cram all the work into his own evening. He felt a slight stirring of resentment that Applejack had apparently used his absence to sneak away and do her own thing. He frowned at the resentment until it skirted away back to his box. Applejack wasn't the kind of pony could have skipped work unless something important had come up, which given some of the things that she had gotten mixed up since Twilight Sparkle came into town. Could it be just about anything? Had another dragon attacked? Was she helping a rescue friend from an underground jewel thieves? Could have she whisked away and Canterlot on Princess Celestia's orders? He was still impressed on that practical, down-home pony from their family and was hobnobbing the upper crust without picking up all the sorts of silly hairs and graces. Applejack was level-headed today, and she had never been since the day she had got her cutie mark, and he was proud of her. He dragged the cart into the barn and was holding the baskets when he had noticed the ladder from the hayloft on the floor. Usually it sat by the hayloft door, leading down the floor, but it had fallen or been kicked over. He couldn't park the cart after unloading it there, so he hesitantly stashed over the baskets where Granny couldn't reach them in the morning and gripped the ladder between his teeth. It took two smaller ponies to maneuver the whole thing usually. Applejack and Applebloom typically worked together, since Granny Smith could barely move her withers just to pick it up more than if apples did these days. It was no trouble for him, however. He gently placed it up and put it back where it should be. As he turned away, the sound of movement made his ears twitch. It was coming from the hayloft. He turned back, thinking it may be a raccoon or a stray squirrel that had gotten in. Once the entire family of Grinkles had nested up there, and they had been forced to carry each of the squalling, scratching lizard bird down individually in a special unbreakable carriers Twilight had whipped up for them. He hoped that it wasn't more Grickles, although that would account for why the ladder had been kicked down. Grickles was notoriously territorial when they chose a nesting spot. He climbed the ladder quietly, not wanting to face a full of claws when he reached up the top. He couldn't smell anything bad, but it was the indicator. Peering cautiously over the top rung, he froze. Well, it sure wasn't Grickles. Applejack slept curled in hay, her tail over her nose. That was how she used to sleep under the blankets as a filly, when the boiler blew and the farmhouse especially got cold. Behind her open mouth and a glob of drool ready to fall, Applejack also sprawled up in the sleep of hay. Neither had heard him approach. They were both clearly exhausted. That made him pause, however. It wasn't the fact that his sister was napping up while he was busy working on the orchards. It was casually positive hoof that Rainbow Dash had thrown over her flank, and was just the fact of was wearing Applejack's hat. Applejack never let anyone wear her hat. She had been protective of it ever since Pa gave it to her on one of his rare visits home. Not even he or Applebloom were allowed to touch it, but there Rainbow Dash was as bold as brass, wearing a scood like it was her own. Big Macintosh stayed where he was for a long moment. He considered ducking out of sight and coughing to them to give him a chance to reorder themselves, so they could all pretend that things were what they always been. He wasn't faking this, however. Applejack shifted in her sleep, nuzzling backwards the curve of Rainbow Dash's body. Her tail fell aside to reveal she was smiling under utter contentment. Big Macintosh descended the ladder with the soundless of everyone would be surprised at. Given at the soup plate hooves and the massive body, he passed through the barn doors but stopped. Looking back over his shoulder, going back to the ladder, he took it between his teeth and brought it down, using his knees to cushion the sound of it meeting the floor. It lay where it had been before he came, giving no clue that he had moved it. "What's got you smelling like a fox with the key in the house door?" Granny asked when he came into the kitchen. "Did you find Sweetheart today?" He sort of thought about the question about Shirley. Sorta. What kind of a sweetheart is sorta sweetheart? Complicated. Granny sighed. You young folk never make something simple. You're just going to be long in the tooth to keep putting itself settling down, Macintosh. He shrugged. Probably. You'll need to find some pony special. Get coupled and be happy. You and Applejack both. We shouldn't let it get to your age to have no pony special to call her own too. He thought about the hayloft and smiled. Not a problem, Granny. You're smiling again. She glared at him. Are you gonna tell me why? Nope. Gad nabbit. No pony tells me nothing anymore. It's because I'm old, am I? Y'all think I'm too old for an old-fashioned to know what's going on in your lives? I was so young once too, you know. She continued to grumble as she sliced the apples into go in the pie crust sitting on the counter. Big Macintosh looked out the window of the barn, and he just smiled. Big Macintosh was admiring the shiny new barn when he heard the footsteps behind him. Usually he would have been able to tell exactly who it was, but with so many ponies crowded the old homestead were too many of them to choose from. However, it was walked slightly, not even with the heavy gait of workhorse like himself, not lightly enough to be a mare, filly, or colt. There weren't many lean apple stallions, so Big Macintosh was surprised at the voice that hailed him. Aren't you coming inside? He shook his head without turning around. Brayburn trotted up to him, bending his neck so he could look up to Big Macintosh's face. In the actual fact that he just got a good look at his cousin's upturned chin. You sure? Granny Smith broke out the apple cider. It's turning into a real shindig in there. Despite the popular opinion, they didn't sell every scrap of cider they made each year. Granny kept a barrel or two for special occasions and had stockpiled more this year than she had planned to go to the family reunion. Even though Applejack had taken over organizing everything, he was willing to bet his sister didn't know about the cider until Granny roped some pony into rolling it up the steps from the cellar. The call of the cellar didn't resonate enough with Big Macintosh to help make him want to move. He had thought about nothing could surprise him about the barn anymore. They were unleashing more secrets and on about his family. He was beginning to think of some sort of magical place. No matter how many times it got knocked down, it sprang back up again. It had been the scene of some of the most significant moments of their lives. While he's showing them the pictures of old reunions, Granny had also run snapshots of their full hoods. Apple Bloom had squirmed at the embarrassment of the photos of herself in a diaper, and then she laughed at her sister and her brother at the same age. Applejack had gazed over at ages at the picture taken when she was no bigger than a June bug, and was still talked in a high voice like a spindle-legged filly. However, that one that snagged Big Macintosh's attention like a cloth on a rusty nail had been taken long before either of them were born. A picture of two ponies that still faced could be seen in themselves and his sisters. His parents had been married in that barn, and Granny Smith had dolled it up brighter than a maypole. Her carefully assembled flower arrangements framed the hulking mare as she walked on hind legs, carrying her new husband out in the sunlight, with dozens of hats were tossed into the air around them. Big Macintosh still missed them. It surprised him at how fresh and old pain he could feel. Applejack had some good memories, but Apple Bloom had none. He was glad she looked up to her sister, and so she tried to be a good role model for her too. Sometimes, though, it all just got a bit much for his shoulders. He loved his extended family, but rebuilding the barn and being in such a close proximity of the place in the newest photo were his parents didn't stand to make him uncomfortable. Rather than say anything, he had retreated outside and sat quietly in his thoughts, as he was his habit. Brayburn didn't know his cousin was well enough to read his mood, but if he ever had a mind to play, Big Macintosh had the best poker face in the whole Apple family. Besides, Brayburn was younger and always had been closer to Applejack anyway. His playful nature was a good match for hers, and when they were younger, and when he still retained his exuberance, even though in life in Appaloosa had toned him down a bit, life out there was harder than he had thought when he had hauled a hoof over to the new life in the wilderness. But like Apple, he was making a big go of it, and Big Macintosh could admire that kind of contentment. Big Macintosh? Yup. Did I do something to offend you? Nope. Then why are you ever gonna look at me? He finally lowered his eyes from the weather vane Apple Bloom and Babs had found it in a bush the other side of the first orchard. It had not straightened up when the barn was destroyed. They had spent hours carefully knocking the dents out and polishing it into a shine. Brayburn was watching them with concern. "You know you're worrying about your sisters," Brayburn chastised. "You done worried your own plenty of time." He laughed. "True enough. Even so, I reckon Applejack would appreciate you coming back inside and being a sociable." "She said that?" "No, not in many words." Big Macintosh nodded. "I'll come back in a spell." Brayburn didn't seem convinced, but quickly realized that this was his best that he was going to get. Big Macintosh wasn't the one wasting words, so that he said the meant. However much he had matured, Brayburn just wasn't out for sitting on for long intervals, so he made his excuses and retreated back to the farmhouse. When he opened the door to enter, sounds of a party were released like a flock of noisy birds. It sounded like a real party. Still, Big Macintosh did not move. This wasn't the same barn that where he and his ma and pa got hitched, but parts of it were from the original building. If he sat there long enough, maybe he could spot them all woven into the new structure. The way certain physical features and personality traits of theirs had become woven to their children. Applejack was stubborn just like Pa. Apple Bloom was a dreamer, like Ma. Big Macintosh got his build from their mother, who had always been heavy-set and quite a stir when she chose a husband who overbalanced into his face, as if so much he picked up a hammer. The way Granny told it, Ma hailed it from the helmet, and that she had been absorbed to Ponyville, but at the same time sat with their ways distant. Every month when she and her own father came down the hall to sell their pots, she had admired Pa from across the marketplace. Granny recalled seeing dumpy little Philly watching them to try to lug sacks of apples like he did on the hung of the moon. "Those were the days before we realized he was a better grabber than a grabber. You understand? Your father had the gift of gab, young'un. Your mother, not so much." Ma had fought herself too ugly and plain until she finally gathered enough courage to cross that marketplace by herself and apple from him. That opened the floodgates, and Pa had ever been so blown away by the courtship of him that made him right from the start that he couldn't see another mare past those stars in his eyes. Ma had ever gone on to Granny and asked her about treasuring away of her son's hoof in marriage, which had made Granny laugh until her belly ached for a month's Sundays. Big Macintosh didn't know how much true there was and how much the family legend, but there were nice stories and worth hanging on to, just like the barn. After a while, he was certain Brayburn wouldn't return. He said, "You could come out now." Nothing happened. "I know you're there. I know apples. You ain't no apple up that tree." For a few moments, nothing moved. Then, like a sloth slipping from its perch, a black shape dropped out of a nearby tree. It resolved itself into a pony that walked into the shadows and stood glaring at him like he did, sunk in the tree trunk to make her fall. "See?" Big Macintosh said audibly. "See what?" she demanded. "You ain't no apple." She rolled her eyes. "Well, duh!" She continued to glare. But when she didn't respond, the expression wavered. "Aren't you gonna say something?" "Nope," he smiled at himself. "Except that and that. You're a real comedian." He looked at her. He stood there like she expected him to say something uncharitable. He wondered what he had done to her to cause her to think that. Instead, he chose to say nothing and went back to gazing at the new barn. She shifted from hoof to hoof. "You guys built that thing pretty quick," she said at last. Evidently, she liked the silence as much as Brayburn did. "Yup. Many hooves make light work, huh?" "Yup. Must be nice," she said, so quietly as he wasn't sure if he heard her right. He flicked her ear in her direction, which she apparently noticed as she cleared her throat. "We'll see how long this one lasts, huh? Like, how many has this barn been destroyed now? Anyway, 10, 20, 100, 16. 16 times she sat there like this, looking for signs of the old and in the new." "Really?" She sounded surprised. "You kept count?" Yup. Wow, I'm not sure if that's sad or impressive. He shrugged. It rarely bothered him. The other ponies thought of him as long as his family and his farm were all right. He had a little cause to be dissatisfied. Well, he fought with the flicker as long as the Cutie Mark Crusaders didn't slip him any more love potions, that is. After a long moment, she said, "You sure look like looking at the barn, don't ya?" "Yup. I don't get it." He shrugged again. "Why in the hay did you get me down from that tree if you didn't want to talk to me? I could just easily have stayed up there and been comfortable for my nap." "That ain't the way you were in that tree." "What so?" He shook his head. "It's evening." "Yeah, and—" "You don't nap of the evenings. Besides, you were up there all day." "You noticed me?" She sounded shocked, realizing her increased volume as she lowered her voice. "Why didn't you say anything?" He shrugged, how to put it into words that he had known exactly why she was there, who she really was there for, and why she hadn't revealed herself to the rest of the Apple family. It went beyond simply respecting their rights as a private family function. Big Mac recalled the last noteworthy thing he had witnessed in the barn was his last incarnation. He knew this pony wouldn't understand its significance. Besides, he couldn't mention it now, and they hadn't, just as it wasn't his place to broach their secrets, even with them. "Applejack sure worked hard for you today, huh?" he said. "Huh? Well, yeah, what, I guess. Mighty proud of her." "Great, whatever." She refined Shine's disinterest. "Listen, I'm gonna head off." "Wait." At long last, he had a good reason to. Big Macintosh got to his feet, shook out his mane and muscles sore from the day's labors and cramping from sitting for too long. He lumbered towards the farmhouse, pausing to look over his shoulder. "You coming? Me?" He nodded. "I may have escaped your notice, big guy, but I'm not an apple." She flapped her wings in emphasis and wiggled her cutie mark at him, displaying its lack of anything fruit-based. "See? I see. Great, so, yeah, I gotta fly." "I see you." "What?" She scrunched up her nose. "Is this one of your trick statements, like Twilight likes, like if a tree falls alone in the Everfree Forest, doesn't make those noise, yada, yada, yada?" He regarded her, and remembered Applejack the day she came home with stories about her brand new amazing friend, who could do so many awesome things. She had galloped along the path so fast she tumbled, and still had a tiny scar under her chin from hitting the dirt. Being cleaned up hadn't stopped her from telling the truth about the Pegasus who could do loop-de-loop, barrel roll, nosedive, plus 100 other tricks. But who didn't live with her parents had an account for them for not being around anymore. Applejack didn't know what in the meantime. These days she immediately was aware of this feeling. But it was difficult to be truly alone in the family like the Apples. They had railed with Granny Smith, found herself with 3 young ponies to raise and her own grief to deal with, and she had never forgotten what it was like to have some pony show kindness without wanting something in return. Neither the mayor had told them about them, and he had respected her wishes and her privacy. Even so, something about the sight of the Pegasus covered the twigs and leaves from the full whole day of Scribbler to simplify, so he could watch Applejack be happy with their family. It made him want to show someone more of that apple kindness. "I see you," he said again, in his laborious manner. "And your family. So aren't you coming inside or what?" She stared at him. He wasn't sure what it was in that stare. Astonishment? Suspicion? Panic? He returned with a blank of his own. No pony of all Equestria had beat him to the perfect blank look. It was good thing that he didn't like the cards. "You're—" She wanted to say crazy, but her sneer faltered as she instead ended with, "Sure, they wouldn't mind if I crashed a party." "Can't crash if you're invited." Big Macintosh turned and walked up the path, confident she would follow. "Yeah." She bit her lip and turned half away, wearily racked with indecision. She then drew herself up tall and trotted over after him like she had the right to be there. "You have a point, big guy." The look on his sister's face was worth it. Big Macintosh nodded at her and headed for her cider barrel, where the bray burned past him like a foaming flagon. "Looks like you picked up a stray here, cousin. Ain't that Applejack's buddy? I recommend I met her when they came to Appaloosa." He gulped in his own cider and dragged a hoof across his mouth. "A real firebrand from what I can recall." "Yup." Big Macintosh gulped the cider until there was none left. The buzz was nothing compared to his sister's happiness as she introduced her to a secret special sun pony into her family, and Rainbow Dash's expression when she was mobbed by foals and frailed by her wings. Soon she was offering them turns around the orchard, and the older ponies were welcoming her into their ranks, just as they had a mare who fought herself too much pain and ugly for love all those years ago. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.